Good morning and welcome to this Q2 Dorset Police and Crime panel. My name is Mike Short. I'll be chairing this today. Mark, could I ask you to lead with Agenda 1, please? Item 1.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Chair. So if I start just by introducing myself, I'm Mark Eyre. I'm the Service Manager for Assurance for Dorset Council and the lead officer for this panel. I will go through a bit of meeting etiquette in a minute, but I was going to start off just by giving a short roll call. I'll start with the members of the panel. I'll introduce each member of the panel, and if you could just perhaps turn your camera on at that point and introduce yourself. So to start with, Councillor Dove.
Good morning. I'm Vice Chair of the Peace and Crime Panel, a BCP councillor, and also the Safer Communities portfolio holder, including regulatory services.
Thank you. Councillor Barrow.
Morning all, I'm Councillor Pete Barrow. I'm representing Dorset Council.
Thank you. Councillor Farquhar.
Good morning all, George Farquhar, panel member representing BCP Council.
Thank you. Councillor Fry.
Good morning, Les Fry, representing Dorset Council.
Thank you. Councillor Haynes.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor May Haynes, representing BCP Council.
Thanks. Councillor Howell.
Good morning, Councillor Mark Howell, representing BCP Council. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Jesperson.
Good morning, Councillor Sherry Jesperson, representing Dorset Council.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Good morning, Councillor David Taylor, representing Dorset Council.
Thank you. And Councillor Johnson.
Councillor Toby Johnson, representing BCP Council.
Thank you very much. And we've had apologies from Councillor Gorringe and from Hmicfrs. If I now move over to the Office for the Police and Crime Commissioner. So if I could ask for the Police and Crime Commissioner to introduce himself and perhaps also introduce his team, if I may.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. I'm David Sidwick. I'm the Dorset Police and Crime Commissioner. And this morning I'm accompanied by Simon Bullock, my Chief Executive.
Good morning, everyone.
By Adam Harold, my Director of Operations.
Good morning, everyone.
And Julie Strange, my Treasurer.
Good morning, everyone.
Thank you very much. And then finally, I'll just introduce the officers supporting us today. So Jim McManus.
Morning, everybody. I'm Jim McManus. I'm Corporate Director for Finance and Commercial Services at Dorset Council and Finance Advisor to the panel. Good morning.
Thank you. And finally, Elaine Tibble.
Good morning, I'm Elaine Tibble. I'm a Senior Democratic Services Officer with Dorset Council.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think that is a full roll call. If I've missed anyone, now is your opportunity to let me know. If not, before passing back to the chair, I was just going to make a very brief statement in relation to this being treated as an informal meeting. So in light of the situation with COVID-19 case rates, the Dorset Council Chief Executive, Matt Prosser, has exercised his delegated powers to continue to hold virtual informal committee meetings. So where a decision is required by the committee, the chair will invite members to express a minded to decision in respect to the recommendations set out in the reports, with decisions being taken under officer delegated authority in light of minded to decisions expressed by members in the virtual meeting. Any decisions required will be confirmed by the appropriate officer at the conclusion of the committee's debate on the agenda item. Then finally, just a brief bit of etiquette. If panel attendees could be reminded just to keep their cameras and microphones off other than when speaking. And for panel members, please use the side panel and RTS right to speak if you want to raise an issue. Thank you very much, Chair. Back to you.
Thanks very much, Mark. If I could ask you to kindly lead us through the actions from the last meeting, please.
Certainly. So a number of actions have been responded to. So first of all, there was a request for some further information around number of people who had firearm licences. That information has been received. I've not yet circulated that out to the panel. I will do that following the meeting today. There was an action around benchmarking to be raised at the training day that we held in November. The training day did include a run through the performance element of the Police and Crime Panel monitoring reports, so that action has been finalised. There was also an action relating to an update on the financial position of the Federation, and likewise that has been received. And then finally, a number of actions throughout the agenda about items to be added to the forward plan, which have been added, and the forward plan is picked up later on the agenda. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks very much, Mark. Back to you again. Item 2, declarations of interest, code of conduct.
Thank you. So if I could just invite panel members if there's any declarations that are necessary to ensure compliance with the code of conduct. I'll just pause for a moment. Okay, nothing raised then, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. And then swiftly on to item 3, public participation. If you could lead us through the questions that have come in from a member of the public. Thank you.
Certainly, thanks, then, Chair. So there have been 2 questions raised from Mr. Dan Hardy. I'll go through each one of those separately, and then invite back to yourself, Chair. So the first question: based on just a 3-year term and considerate to the 3 years ready access provided to the now PCC by Dorset Police and many others, why has it taken 6 months to deliver a crime plan, notwithstanding the PCC will have to start campaigning again in just 2 years' time? So if you're happy, Chair, I'll perhaps invite the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Dave, could I ask you to respond to that, please?
Yes, absolutely, Chair. Firstly, I'll say I welcome all public questions. This question talks the different way I see the role of the PCC, which is clearly as a representative of the people of Dorset. I spent 3 years full-time campaigning and engaging with the people of Dorset, more so by far than any other candidate. This was through face-to-face meetings, Zoom and surveys, and it gave me a very clear understanding of their priorities. Those were embedded in the manifesto and in consequence translated into the priorities of the Police and Crime Plan. Look, Dorset clearly wanted a clarity of purpose and clear priorities, but above all, change and immediate action. And their strong mandate allowed me to hit the ground running with a 100-day plan, which achieved over 50 tasks. Also, recruit a new Chief Constable, whilst taking the needed time to liaise with all the partners and meaningfully consult to achieve the production of the Police and Crime Plan, which was 6 months earlier than the statutory obligation. This was a rare achievement, and Dorset was amongst the first areas in the country having a newly elected PCC to have that plan. Regarding the election advice around when to start my campaign, let me be clear, my campaign to be re-elected started the day I took office. The people will decide on election day, and until then, my job is to deliver the plan.
Thank you very much, Dave. Question number 2, please, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Chair. What are the tangible measures for success for the now issued crime plan? To be the safest county, this will take not just year-on-year crime reductions across many crime types, but also an improvement of the subjective feeling of public safety and its promised heightened visibility. These measures will need accounting for now and annually, with true performance publicly shared. This approach is simply linked to the PCC's promises made when a candidate. Considering his reduced term, when will the PCC confirm these business-like measures of success and define tangible returns on investment to the Dorset public from his crime plan strategy?
Again, David, if I could ask you to respond to that question, please.
Absolutely. Well, the measures of success have been confirmed and are published on pages 28 and 29 of my Police and Crime Plan. They're listed in terms of both an overall outcome and specific measures for each of the 6 priorities. These are not exhaustive, and just as delivery will be further refined over the years, so will assessment, analysis and evaluation of whether the desired goals have been achieved. But let's be clear, my manifesto promises were those defined by the people of Dorset, and it is to them that I will be accountable at the ballot box. The ultimate measure of success will be if they feel safer, nothing else.
Thank you very much. Moving on then to item 4, quarterly monitoring report. Just to remind the public, purpose is to receive an update of progress against the Police and Crime Plan to enable the panel to scrutinise activity and assess achievement of outcomes. Remembering that the panel, the plan was issued in October. Dave, if I could ask you to lead us through your report to the panel, I'd appreciate that. If I could kindly ask you to do priority 1, and then I'll hand over to the priority leads, then priority 2, Ian McBee's not here today, and then work our way through that way, if you would, rather than just giving us the full list of priorities. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine with me. If I talk about the whole list first, and then I'll go through the individual ones as you say, Mike.
Okay.
So very clearly, the priorities in the police and crime plan were firstly to cut crime and antisocial behaviour, make policing more visible and connected, fight violent crime and high harm, fight rural crime, put victims and communities first, and make every penny count. So if we start with the first one, and what I'll do, as the panel will have received the papers on this, what I'll do is I'll pick out a couple of highlights for each of the different priorities. Quarter 2 ran between July, August and September. So it covers the period, the majority of the end of the 100-day plan. So if we look first of all at cutting crime and antisocial behaviour, I was very clear that I had to make good on my promise to take action regarding antisocial behaviour. And so I was very happy that in the 100-day plan, Dorset Police stepped up. They now have antisocial behaviour as a priority, and they launched as a response Operation Relentless. That means that each policing area has its own dedicated plan to tackle antisocial behaviour, and the officers work extremely closely with the local authority to identify and reduce those incidents. And there's lots of other operations which are also under Operation Relentless in different parts of the county in order to address antisocial behaviour. I was also very happy that during those first couple of months, I was able to launch an Operation Relentless Community Fund. Applications were welcome from community groups and charities in order to help prevent ASB in their areas, and they could apply for between £100 and £5,000. And I'm very pleased that we've had a large number of applications for that, about 20, and we're working through those which are applicable and making certain they get the money in order to address antisocial behaviour in their area. The other 2 highlights I'll pick out is the PCC attended a proactive patrol. So this is all about the Summer Drink Drive campaign, but I also made quite a deal during that time period around the use of e-scooters. And the reason for that was the biggest thing in my postbag from the public. So I was very happy that Force again stepped up. We've had firstly an educational campaign, but latterly they have seized scooters from people who are using them illegally. And so let's be clear, that is any electric scooter which is not part of the Beryl scooter scheme in BCP. And finally, the last one is one again which was of major concern to residents both during the election campaign and latterly, and that's around pet theft. Dorset Police now have designated leads for each local policing area in order to address this issue, and we continue to lobby, and we're getting closer to making certain that pet theft is a separate item and a separate offence. So I think I'm going to stop there and leave it at those highlights for number 1, and I welcome questions.
Thanks very much, Dave. If Pete and May, do you have any, as priority leads for priority 1, do you have any questions you'd like to take forward with the PCC?
I do, Chair, but Pete, do you want to go first?
No, I'm happy to follow you, May. Pick up on anything you don't cover first.
Very kind. Thank you very much. Thank you for that update, Commissioner. It is still early days because the plan was only published back in October. But I think the point I wanted to ask was relating to ASB. So it's actually very pleasing to see that even if you adjust for COVID-related ASB, the trend is actually going downwards, which is very welcome. The question I have is that obviously anecdotally, I hear from residents that you solve an ASB issue somewhere and then it gets displaced. It goes to another area, for example, street drinking, because the police have actually taken action. They've spoken to the individuals or the groups, and then what they do is they go to another area, and then it just goes round and round and round the houses. So what would you propose to actually do with that, to actually tackle the issue at source rather than have it move around the houses, as it were?
Thank you, mate. That's a really good question. And that goes to the issue around antisocial behaviour. Antisocial behaviour, we know, is complex. And what we're talking about is very specifically, we're talking about things like street drinking. We're talking about things like those who are addicted to drugs and other substances. Look, I absolutely get that. That is the way that we deal with it from a symptom approach. From a core root, we have to get much better at making certain that we have effective rehabilitation. So I am working very hard as the national lead for the addiction and substance misuse portfolio in order to map effective rehabilitation across not just Dorset, but across the whole country. And we want to invest then in those areas which actually are effective. But if we take it a middle step, what we need to understand is exactly who those people are, what their needs are, how they're being supported to get out of the current life and the issues that they have. So I think there is something else that we can do, and something which I am asking the force to do, to work with the local authority in order to understand the exact needs of those people. So we can support them, but we will take measures to address their antisocial behaviour as well. Does that help? Is that sufficient enough?
Yes, that does. Thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing a continued downward trend in the next quarterly monitoring report. Chair, I have one more point. Could I raise that?
Yes, please do. Yeah, this is your show.
Thank you.
You're part of the,
yeah, thank you. So the other point I wanted to raise relates to the KSI, killed seriously injured, where I think it has it is going down, but I think it would not come as a surprise that speeding and speeding related concerns are still being raised very, very regularly, and what I would like to see is, again, the downward trend continuing, and just wondering what steps are being taken to actually keep it that way.
Well, there's a number of steps being taken, May. Firstly, there are a number of campaigns which we are going to be taking forward, like the Drink Drive campaign that we've done. I'm very keen that we also start talking about the issue around drug driving as that goes forward. Speeding itself, I'm liaising with the people of Dorset. I've been to a number of town councils. I've been to a number of parishes where they have a speeding issue. And I'm trying to facilitate closer working between local authorities, parish councils, and the police in order to address that and take the necessary steps. The other thing I'm keen to do is actually increase the number of community speed watch volunteers across Dorset, because we know that where we have those in areas and where it is publicised, then we know that speeding is going down. So it's a work in progress. The last piece of it, I'll say, is as part of the uplift, there will be an increase in the number of traffic officers that we have in Dorset. But that's an operational thing for the chief.
Okay, thank you. That's very welcome. Thank you, Chair. I have no more questions.
Yeah, thanks, Pete.
Yes, if I could just follow up, it's essentially around about the same subjects as May has just raised. And in terms of antisocial behaviour, you're well aware of the discussions we've had before about what happened in Weymouth over the lockdowns. But it's really good to see your focus on prevention and getting to the core of the problem and looking at it from a medical and a treatment point of view, because that's the only way we're ever going to actually reduce it significantly. So it'd be great to see what comes out of that work. And in particular, it'd be good to hear from yourself about whether Dorset Council are giving you the sort of cooperation and support that you need in trying to formulate an effective action plan to deal with that. So, please let us know. And the other one would be speeding. And I mean, it's a massive issue in my ward. I think its number one complaint is the people speeding through the area. and some of the appalling driving behaviour we've seen. And I'd just like to say I'm in the process of trying to set up a community speedwatch group at the moment, and we've been dealing with Dorset Road Safe, and we've had great support from them, so that's really good news. So just wanted to give them a bit of a plug.
Pete, thank you very much indeed. I think one thing I'll just highlight is on Monday was launched the 10-year drug strategy by the government. And in that, there was a significant amount about effective rehabilitation. So you will be hearing lots more about that going forward.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. George, I'll pick your question up in as part of the matrix questions, if that's okay with you. Moving on to priority 2. Les, I understand that you're going to stand in for Ian today. That's very kind of you. You have a question.
No, thank you, Mike. Commissioner, good morning. In relation to Pillar 2, I welcome your commitment to recruit more special constables. Special constables can be the backbone of the force. They can make a massive difference to policing, keeping Dorset safe and all your priorities. But my concern is, how are you going to retain them and motivate them? If they're in Bournemouth and Poole, in Weymouth, they're fighting crime, they're very busy, then they're motivated and they're engaged. If they're in Shaftesbury, Gillingham, Sturminster, Sherborne, Dorchester, Bridport, and so on, it's less attractive. How are you going to retain them? Do you have a plan? And you may not at this moment, but it's certainly worth something on the radar.
Les, firstly, thank you very much indeed for the question. I should compliment you on your waistcoat and your bow tie. I think that is very seasonal.
Homemade by my wife.
Even better, even better. Sir, you're absolutely right. I would take issue about it not being quite so attractive. I think it depends on the special constable. Something I am very, very keen on is that when we're recruiting, and whether it be special constables or indeed police officers, that they really reflect the communities that they serve. So I've had discussions around this in terms of particularly the rural areas. And we'll be seeking to recruit special constables who come from the rural areas, who understand the rural areas and the needs of the people in those parts of Dorset, and also understand rural crime. So those conversations are going on at the moment. And I'm very happy that the force understands my commitment to the special constables. I'm very happy that they understand that actually they have to be people who want to do the job in the areas that they are designated or come from. And I should pay tribute to the special constables and the work that they do, because I've seen amazing work. You know, sometimes it is extremely hard, if at all, that you can tell the difference between what the special constable is doing and what a police officer is doing. So yeah, thank you to the specials. But yeah, we keep on it, Les. Absolutely.
Is that something you're going to give us feedback as how recruitment goes and how the retention goes, out of interest, as we go forward over the years?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for answering the question.
If you just hang on, Les. Dave, do you want to talk us through priority 2 whilst we've got Les there?
Yeah, I'm aware that we went straight to the question, but I was very happy to do that. We actually bottomed out a lot of priority 2 last time we met around the uplift and the numbers. But let me be very clear that my commitment remains the same from the point of view. I want to see the uplift. These bobbies which are coming to Dorset, I want to see the majority of them in the neighbourhood, in the communities, making the difference there. You will have seen in that first couple of months that Dorset Police basically relaunched their neighbourhood engagement commitments. And they're also making use of a revised key community contacts database. Something I'm very keen to ensure is that the key stakeholders in areas are absolutely understanding of what the police are doing in the neighbourhood, and that the police have greater connectivity with the public. So I'm very pleased to see that. There'll be more about that as we go forward. And the last one was customer service. So I am very aware, one of the reasons why I got myself involved and wanted to do this job was because I had a pretty poor response when I phoned 101. Well, that needs to be addressed. There are a number of issues that we're taking steps around that at the moment. But I'm very pleased now that the Dorset Police will join the single online home web platform. That's something that other forces have had for a long while. We've been late to the party, unfortunately. But when it comes, that will help decrease the demand. Look, we know that a lot of our phone calls are basically not really policey stuff. When somebody phones 999 and they're locked out of their flat, that's a locksmith. That's not really for us. So I spent quite a bit of time sort of raising awareness of the additional demand on the force in the summer and pointing members of the public towards the best contact channels. And there will be more of that being done. So we're looking at a number of things. We're looking at technology, we're looking at recruitment, we're looking at basically communication around this in order to basically make that customer service better.
Thanks very much, Dave. Do you have any points, Leslie, you'd like to raise, follow up?
No, I think they've all been covered at this time, and welcome that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Talking of 101, I've had a note in from Ian Hmicfrs, who's a panel member. I thought I'd feed this back. I'm going to read it out. It says, I've had reason to use 101 on 2 occasions using the phone and the online system. On both occasions, I was really happy with the way calls for service were dealt with and the way that the local neighbourhood team followed the matters up, as I've been told they would from the call handlers. So if you could take that back, whilst I understand that there are certain issues with 101, it's not all bad news. So thank you very much.
Mike, that is utterly brilliant. We tend to hear the bad news. We don't tend to get the good news. So thank you very much indeed. I will pass that on.
Mike, Commissioner, can I echo the online system? That online system does work, and anybody who's listening to this meeting should use the online system. It works very, very efficiently, and I had a call back within 24 hours on a matter that was a lower priority, so it works really well.
You're absolutely right, Councillor Fry. That is the message that I put out there, and the force are putting out there.
Okay,
if it's just a report, use the online system.
Yeah. Moving on, priority 3, David, please, if you could talk us through that, and then I'll hand back to May.
Yes, absolutely. Priority 3 is the one about fighting violent crime and high harm. There's a number of things here that we did straight out of the box. I was very clear that I wanted Dorset in this space to have a national voice around addiction. So I put myself forward to be the joint leader of the addiction and substance misuse portfolio. That basically means we've got a number of priorities which we'll be working on a national level, but all of that will benefit Dorset. The first one has been to address harmful gambling, and we've raised the awareness around that nationally. But the one I'm really interested in, well, there's 2 actually. There is one around effective rehabilitation, which I spoke about earlier, but the other one is to drive impactful education. We can't just enforce our way out of the issue of drugs and addiction. We have to have tough enforcement on the dealers and those who are drug taking and are antisocial, but we also have to put in place effective rehabilitation for those who need it, and above all, we have to cut the demand in the first place. So we need impactful education and highlighting the issue around recreational drugs. And those are the priorities which we'll be taking forward. The other thing that we achieved during that first couple of months is drug dealing has been agreed as a regional priority by all Southwest Police and Crime Commissioners. And we will be talking more about that in the future. And actually, when it comes to actually seeing what's going on the ground, Dorset Police are very good at disrupting organised crime and county lines, and I witnessed I observed an operation with a large number of plainclothes and uniform officers, where basically we flooded Weymouth train station. This was between Dorset Police and British Transport Police. We disrupted drug supply to the town, and we made a number of significant arrests. And I was accompanied by a couple of MPs to that observation. And I think that's one part of the key things I need to do is make certain our MPs are fully communicated with about the issues facing Dorset Police, and they can take those messages back for us. What else in this space? Well, I welcomed the Hmicfrs Child Protection Report. That came out, and the force is enacting recommendations on that. And we also have Operation Encompass, which started recently, I think, only the start of this year, which receives funding from my office. So we've now facilitated the sharing of safeguarding information with more than 300 schools. But I'm very aware that issues around Operation Encompass, which actually deals with children who have witnessed domestic abuse or violence in their home, basically we need to go earlier. So I've asked the force what they're going to do regarding rolling that out to nurseries. So watch this space. What else in that? Obviously, one of the things which I welcomed was the forced response to the issue of tackling violence against women and girls. With the nighttime economy opening up in the middle of July after lockdown, I wanted to make certain that we were as safe as possible for everyone. So what they did was they basically had Operation Vigilant, where they had uniformed and plainclothes officers to identify individuals behaving unacceptably. We know that that's worked in other parts of the country, and we saw it working effectively here across the summer. So those are the highlights. This is something which will have a lot of work going forward on it, and I will be bringing reports back on a regular basis regarding that to the panel.
Hmic.
Thank you, Chair. Again, thank you, Commissioner, for that very comprehensive report. So it's early days, but clearly a lot of work has already happened and continues to happen. So what I wanted to touch on was on the top table there, you've got the domestic abuse incidents that has actually gone up quite significantly compared to the previous quarter. So my question is actually twofold. One, is that in any way linked to violence against women and girls? And also whether that could be because certainly I know in the BCP area, we have a domestic abuse strategy and delivery plan in place, whether that could also partly be because there's a higher awareness, and so therefore there's now better reporting. So I'd welcome your comments on that.
So yes, I think that there is better reporting. I think that will be driving the data. There may be an element of we've come out of lockdown as well. I can't really comment on that at this time, but yeah, I would say that that is to do with the increase around reporting. The local authority has some really good initiatives around domestic abuse. So does Dorset Police, and we're determined to drive it out. Your question about whether that is violence against women and girls, well, the majority of domestic abuse incidents we know work that way. There is obviously domestic abuse the other way, but those tend to be less well reported, and there are domestic abuse incidents between those of the same sex, but again, those tend to be less well reported. So there is more work to do in those spaces regarding that. But I'd say, yes, the majority of that is down to exactly what you're saying, is people are much more aware and should be. It is one of the things which worries me a lot is domestic abuse, not just for those who are involved in it, but for their children, which is just what we've just talked about.
Yes, indeed, and it's something that I feel quite strongly about, that we need to really focus on. So I'd sort of see what the figures will look like in the next quarter. The other point I wanted to raise was to do with knife crime. I know we talk about, I think recently there has been an amnesty where people were asked to hand in knives, but certainly in the BCP area, in the media, we do hear of knife crime, and what is actually even more worrying about that is the fact that the age group of those involved in the knife crime, that is quite alarming, that they are of a younger age. So what plans are there to actually tackle this? Because it may be drug related, I don't know the full facts, but it is certainly something that is of concern.
Thank you for that. Yes, absolutely. So first of all, let's put this into context from the point of view of numbers. Dorset is still a very safe county. Our knife crime offences are around the 300 mark. To compare that with London, which is 13 to 14,000. So we are a very safe county. Nevertheless, this is something which we need to preserve and particularly amongst our young people. So we have a number of things going on at the moment around that. Something I'm very keen on is that we have a Renovated Safer Schools programme. And I have asked the force to basically look at that, which they're in the process of doing so. In tandem with that, we have done a knife crime video, which is being used with schools. I am looking at other areas and what they're doing in this regard and bringing that to Dorset. So you will see that there is a gap in where we've got to for the first for this period, Q2, because something I'm very keen on is what I call fixing the future. So bringing programs which address not only drugs but also knives, misogyny, all those issues around being a good citizen and how we get our young people not to go down the paths which some of them are doing at the moment. So there's a lot of work in this space, but it's a work in progress.
Okay, and that's actually very welcome. But this is just more common than anything else. I noticed that under modern slavery, it says there's no update. So I'm just wondering whether by the time we get to the next quarter, the very, very recently passed Borders Bill, which could eventually lead those people who have actually come across the channel to actually go into modern slavery. So I actually just look forward to seeing what update you would have in there. But it's not for now because that bill was only just passed yesterday. Thank you, Commissioner.
I've also got to say, May, that one of the issues I have, and this is Q2, there's a lot of stuff going on, but I'll obviously report on that in Q3 and Q4 and onwards, if you see what I mean.
Yes, thank you. I have nothing else, Chair.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thanks very much, mate. You say there's work to be done in the area of violence against women and girls. So what is your sort of strategic action plan? You've highlighted that you're looking to the future. I'm just seeing, you may not even have it at the moment, but off the top of your head, what is your sort of views on your strategic action in this particular area? Highlighting that you've done the work in public, but also, as May's pointed out, it's in the home that this more often takes place.
Chair, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely correct to say that I've been unequivocal about this. There is a deep attitudinal behaviour change that is required across our society, and nationwide we need to understand and then tackle the reasons behind why so many young men, and it's typically young men, commit terrible crimes against women. I'm told that across the UK, a woman is killed by a man every 3 days. It's a sobering statistic. I have pledged to do all that I can as Dorset's Police and Crime Commissioner to ensure that this county is the safest in England and Wales. There is no doubt that this means that women and girls must be safe and feel safe wherever they are, whether on our streets or in our own homes. In terms of strategy, the obvious starting point is this plan. You can see that violence, domestic abuse, stalking and other high harm areas are clearly prioritised. There's also a dedicated section of the plan that addresses violence against women and girls. And so what I'd like to do is list the following actions. Firstly, I will work with the police and partners to counter violence against women and girls by making our public places safer and by exploring behaviour changing courses to tackle hypermasculinity and misogyny. Members will know that work has been ongoing with partners to introduce safer public spaces, particularly in areas with a vibrant nighttime economy. My office has submitted, and it's also supported, various national bids. And as mentioned in the quarterly report, Dorset Council has just been awarded £380,000 for projects to help women and girls feel safer on our streets. That funding will pay for CCTV and fund intervention workshops to help increase awareness, change society attitudes, and empower women and girls to feel safer. This follows a large funding award for the Bournemouth area. Now, I touched on it earlier. Dorset Police's Operation Vigilant initiative has also been running in Weymouth and Bournemouth. Second, I will be holding criminal justice agencies to account for investigative and charging decisions involving rape and serious sexual offences to ensure that more of the offenders are brought to justice. I'm now the chair of the DCJB, and as part of the Wessex region, my office has co-funded an independent review of the local criminal justice agency's response to rape and serious offences. This review will be reporting to criminal justice agencies in the next month or so. I'm very clear that wherever a victim is, from the instant that they report to ultimately justice being served, we have to understand what is happening to them, why they drop out of the system, in order to make certain that we increase the number of convictions for rape and sexual assault. Third, I will ensure that victims of rape and serious sexual assaults are provided with the care and support that they need, and that they have the confidence to report these crimes to the police. Since taking up office, I've made it my business to meet with Women's Aid, You First, STARS, the Waterloo Project, and the chair of the Dorset Domestic Abuse Forum. That is in addition to talking to the local authorities about what they are doing around domestic abuse. At such meetings, I've been able to hear firsthand from victims about their experience, as well as draw upon the considerable experience and insight that these organisations have offered on behalf of the victims and communities they represent. And finally, I will continue to raise awareness of honour-based violence, forced marriage and female genital mutilation, and work with agencies to tackle such crimes and support victims. Look, there's lots going on. There's plenty more that myself and the office could say on this topic. But I hope that gives some reassurance of the action that we've taken, that we've got planned, not just on, again, the symptom, but trying to get to the root cause of why this is happening. I will obviously be holding the Chief Constable to account for ensuring that Dorset takes on board the national learning from a range of inquiries and reviews that are ongoing. And whether it is, wherever it is in Dorset, I want to make certain that we have improved safety and that we drive down violence on women and girls. In short, though, all agencies up and down the country must work together to deliver the significant changes that are required. So I'm going to do everything I can alongside the Chief to make sure that Dorset Police plays its part in that.
Okay, thank you very much for that full answer. Mark, if I could ask you to put that on the forward work plan, we'll obviously sort out timelines, but it will be well into next year where we'll do a deep dive on this particular area because it's very important. Yep. Mark, I see you've got a question. I'll deal with that when we go through the whole panel in the box on the briefing report that you've got. Moving on to priority 4, fight rural crime.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this was something that obviously was highlighted to me during the election campaign period. I'm very aware that in many ways crime is underreported in the rural areas. I'm very aware that they would very much like to see greater visibility of our police. And police is a universal service. So this was something that I was very clear we had to do, was make certain that we equally delivered for every person in Dorset, wherever they may live. This is the one which for Q2, we're moving in the right direction. So if I can highlight the big commitment that I got, I was able to announce following the new Chief Constable, and I had a lot of discussions about what we need to do about rural crime. We now have a shared ambition to significantly increase the rural crime team in the coming months and years. And initially, we're going to double it. Now, I will bring forward when that happens to the panel, a report on it. We've got that commitment. We're working on that at the moment. I've seen the plan. I'm very comfortable with the plan for that doubling. But it's actually more than that. It's actually making a better commitment, a better link up between the rural crime team, the neighbourhood policing teams. And if I hark back to priority 2, making certain that the uplift goes into our rural areas as well as our urban areas in order to make certain that that works better. If I can pick on the red for a moment, something I'm very clear is we've got to have joined up thinking across the rural area, top down and across. And something I want to launch is something called Country Watch, which I've talked about before. So basically, we were preparing to hold a rural crime roundtable with attendees, and we were basically scoping that out and getting that done, and further work to develop that, and indeed further work to develop forced data. So the eagle-eyed may notice that the key measures at the top are slightly light at this moment in time. We're working with the force to try and get some better key indicators for the rural area. And that's a work in progress, and we will keep you updated on that. So I think that's where we are at the moment. It's very much a work in progress. We've got a coordinated approach across the southwest as well regarding organised crime in the rural area. But again, that's really more for another day.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Les.
Thanks for that update, Commissioner. I welcome the opportunity to work with you on this because rural crime, as you know, is one of my passions.
Absolutely.
And I'm aware that your plan is not long been created, so I don't feel it's right or appropriate to challenge too much at this time. My one question is, Commissioner, myself and Councillor David Taylor had a really constructive meeting with Adam Harold from your team, and that was very, very beneficial, and we were grateful for his time and that to meet there. But the one question that is outstanding, you may not, and I'm not expecting you to answer at this time, is what is rural crime? Rural crime is clearly crime on farms, it's in the rural areas. But what about that golf club in Parkstone, that golf club in Weymouth, if the tractor's taken or the mower's taken? What about that Land Rover in the middle of Bournemouth or pool that's there, it's parked up, mud all over it, that's then nicked? Is that something that you may be able to work on? Because I'm also aware that nationally there isn't really a definition on this subject either.
Well, that's a complication. That's what we're working on. That's why I'm trying to get better performance indicators. Look, I'm very clear, and I said it. Well, look, I can't because I'm jumping ahead of where I should be reporting on. But I am very clear that there is two components, if I can put it this way, to rural crime. One are rural crimes which only happen in rural areas, like hare coursing. You don't get much of that in the centre of Boscombe. And also there are crimes which occur in the rural communities which are the same as everywhere else. And we've got to have a strategy to tackle both of those. So I hope that gives you some reassurance, but as I say, there's more coming down the tracks.
Absolutely. You've got equestrian crime, you've got horticulture crime, and so on. So Absolutely. I just wanted to put that on tape, and I didn't really expect an answer this time. So I'm grateful for your time on that one, but it's on our radar, it's suffice to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I welcome your support, Les.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Les. Moving on to priority 5, put victim and communities first.
Yes, absolutely. Look, this has to be a golden thread, if you like, that runs amongst all the other priorities. But I was very clear that there was a number of things I wanted to do straight away. I wanted to basically make certain that I understood the issues around hate crime, for example. And we've got a hate crime awareness course, which is being developed in conjunction with Prejudice Free Dorset, and plans for a hate crime conference in 2022. I was also clear that it's about communities. It's about strengthening our communities. So one of the things that I want to do is I want to strengthen our neighbourhood watches, for example. And I've spent time with the Association of Dorset Watches. I very quickly have given them a grant. What that grant will do, it will help produce and disseminate a community safety booklet, which I've seen in action and has been really well accepted. The other thing that we did was we actually used some of that money for signage. And I was very, very happy to hear from one neighbourhood watch that just putting up the signs had reduced the antisocial behaviour on their patch. So basically that for me is a win. We're going to keep on doing that. We're going to be trying to expand in neighbourhood watches. There is a whole piece around business and retail crime, which at this moment, for the reporting period for this plan, we were basically moving ahead with a business crime roundtable. I had, during this time period, individual meetings with pretty much every business improvement district and with chambers of commerce across Dorset in order to have discussions in order to basically make the way for a business crime roundtable. The other thing that we did, but I'm going to hold it back because I actually talked to it more under item 6, was recruit an overarching scrutiny panel. So basically start recruitment for that, for the use of police powers and standard scrutiny. But I will talk to that more under item 6. So I think I'll leave it there. And Over questions.
George.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I really appreciate the efforts that you've put into this priority, predominantly by actually identifying that it is a priority. And I really appreciate the fact that we're seeing some practical results for funding from your office in the form of neighbourhood watching with signage. I wanted to give a little bit of feedback before I ask my question as regards that working well with the neighbourhood teams. For instance, I received a complaint about people being worried about street drinking in one of the local green spaces within the ward that I represent. I mentioned that to the neighbourhood police and team inspector, and that police and team inspector, Helen Deacon, worked with the local authority, and very quickly, because we enjoy across the majority of the BCP area a public space protection order, signage went up, and the public space protection order is related to antisocial behaviour, which you probably know, which is actually related or caused by drinking and being under the influence. So that's good, and it's great to see. But I'll come back to what more can be done for those individuals that are not of the digital world, that are either in digital poverty, or they might well be that they're of an age or a demographic whereby the digital interface is beyond them, whether that be down to age or educational needs or so on and so forth. I'll be interested to explore what more that your office can do with the neighbourhood watch teams to engage those individuals that are perhaps behind closed doors, seeing crimes happening, but don't have the ability to report online. And again, this comes back to 101, the ability to pick up the phone. So I'd be interested in your thoughts of what you think that your office and yourself can do to actually reach that quite large percentage of the public that would we be able to help in our increasing the strength of our communities, which you mentioned.
Thank you, George. Well, that is obviously a concern, is those people who are not digitally aware. And we have only the recourse of the letterbox, if I can put it that way. And that's where neighbourhood watches can be really, really helpful, because virtually everyone I've spoken to has a programme of delivery at least once or twice a year around issues. But I don't think that it's just about supporting the neighbourhood watches. I've got something else on the go around the issue of fraud and cybercrime, which isn't within Q2. I'll be reporting on it obviously later on once we've got it off the blocks. But that is, I have a couple of charities who have said that they will help from the point of view of delivering when they are going around and doing their normal business. And they work with some of the most vulnerable in our society, so that's a good thing. That will give me a significant number of extra volunteers delivering prevention stuff. At the moment, we're working towards an external sponsor for the payment for the number of leaflets that we want to do. When that's all landed, I'll be able to report on that. I do get it, I do understand it, and it's not just an issue for you, George, it's an issue that concerns me across the rural areas as well, because not everybody loves a computer.
If I may, Chair, I'd like to ask another question, which was triggered from the previous priority report, but I think it might be opportune to ask it just now.
Yeah, please do.
Yes, so it relates to the feeling of safety to report for women and girls to report crimes to the police, and the efforts which have been done around that. I've been working with a neighbourhood policing team for the trial of the police street safe application, whereby people can, again, digitally report anonymously areas which they feel that are frightening to them, that are scared, e.g. because of antisocial behaviour, individuals hanging around, over overgrown bushes, etc., that might hide a possible assailant, areas where they feel unsafe because there's no lighting or CCTV coverage, and so on and so forth. Now, obviously, this affects, to the greater majority, a demographic whereby they feel more vulnerable because of their gender or their sex. But it affects a lot of us, and I have used Street Safe to actually report this. I'd be interested in your access to the data that's been gathered from Street Safe and how you think that the Police and Crime Commission Office would be able to use that to achieve some of the priorities that you have.
Okay. So first of all, I'm aware of Dorset Police using and actually promoting Street Safe. At this moment in time, I'm not aware of anywhere which is actually espoused it as much as you have, George. So I'd be really interested to see your data. At this moment in time, that's another component in the mix from the point of view of what they will be using in order to address the safety for our residents. And I'll be asking them about it going forward. I would see that as part of my normal scrutiny to ask the force how they're using Street Safe.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner.
Thanks very much, George. And I think that's a good point George has raised there. If you could take that forward on the Street Safe, that would be really of benefit, I hope. Before I move on to priority 6, finance element, I am going to, because I know the panel's been waiting, I'm going to go through the matrix, ask panel members if they've got any questions based on what they've heard so far, on the quarterly monitoring report. George, you just had your shout. So, Sherry.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions, if I may. The first one is just I want to push a little harder on this question of violence against women and girls. Now, we've spoken about this at some length, and first of all, I have to say I'm very pleased that we're giving this much airtime to this really important question, because if not here, then where? And I am pleased with what I've heard so far. And I'm also pleased with the recognition that there's more to do. But I hope that in this recognition of more to do, we can start to have an understanding that the challenge goes beyond mitigating the dangers to women and girls. It's not just a matter of better lighting so that women and girls feel safe in dangerous spaces. We have to address the question of the danger at source. Removing the danger. If we're telling women that they have to moderate their behaviour in order to accommodate violent men, then that's not a success as far as I'm concerned. That's a step on the way, but that's not the outcome we're looking for. And so I hope that when we have, and I'm not expecting you to give me an answer to this, but when we have this deep dive into this area later in the year, I hope that we will have the courage to go beyond mitigation measures and actually look at what the police and indeed working with local authorities can do about the whole question of, you've called it toxic masculinity, which is absolutely right, and misogyny, and what we can do collectively as a society to address those issues. Because while we're still saying to women and girls, this is what you have to do because men are violent, then that's not answering the question. So yeah, and you might want to comment on that, but really I'm just putting a marker down that I want us to go really deep when we deep dive into this.
Sherry, thank you for that. I couldn't agree with you more. And that's why, as part of the measures that I announced earlier, we'll be looking at how we can address toxic masculinity, misogyny in our society. There are a number of things which are being done across the country, which I'm having a look at the moment, and we will definitely be addressing that. You're right, absolutely right. We've got it's like all the things we've been talking about. We've got the symptom, we've got to keep people safe, but we've also got to address the issues. We've got to address the core problem. And again, that core problem will come back to look, one of my pet things is what I call it, fix the future. We've got to get an understanding of how we teach our kids from really young. Because if we have 8-year-olds acting out drug behaviours in the playground, those 8-year-olds have also seen pornography on their phones. And that concerns me. Because you know, it's all part of the same issue. We've got to basically address that. So yes, absolutely, we will be.
Good. Okay, that's good. Thank you very much. My second question, if I may, Chair, is about the you touched on the government's 10-year drug strategy, which is very interesting, and the £780 million funding that is coming with that. As we know, funding such as that, these big blocks of money, they tend to go to the parts of the country that are perceived as having the highest need, and areas such as Dorset generally are not perceived as having the highest need, and so we tend to lose out when it comes to that kind of funding. Now, in your role as the national lead on addiction and substance misuse, you should be in a fairly good place. So my challenge to you is, how are you going to, working with other partners across the Southwest and with our Dorset MPs, how are you going to secure a fair share of that funding pot for Dorset when we will not be perceived nationally as a very high priority?
Thank you, Sherry. Well, you're absolutely right. That's why, again, this doesn't come into Q2. But from day one, I have been communicating with our local MPs. From day one, I've been equipping them with the data, because this has to be data driven. The data around our funding, but also the data around our demand. And actually, I welcome this 10-year drug strategy for a different reason. It is basically very clear that Bournemouth is in the top 10 of places which requires attention regarding drugs. Right. And that's so. I am very clear that there is going to be less and less places to hide around the need of Dorset. And on my last call with the policing minister, which was last week, I actually raised this particular issue. And that was to talk about the 10-year drug strategy. So we have to overturn a cultural feeling that Dorset is ice cream cones and chocolate box villages.
Yes.
Of course, it is all that. But we also have to make certain that the need is understood. And I'll be working with our local MPs on a regular basis in order to do that. In fact, my next missive is being constructed over the next 2 days.
Good. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sherry. Mark.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, Sherry asked really half of the question I was going to ask, but it was really coming back to this issue of violence against women, and particularly domestic violence. It seems to me that what's being missed to some extent is the fact that a lot of this violence is caused as a byproduct of the stresses that men are put under in wider society in certain areas, and unfortunately, the women, when they're isolated at home, are very vulnerable to men taking out their frustrations, and this happens in other areas as well. But obviously, it's not regulated. You know, it's very difficult to impose any kind of regulation or oversight within the context of a domestic environment. And a lot of this comes back to, within wider society, you can reform organisational structures like councils to make sure that we have the right kinds of cultures and to improve that. But there are a lot of people existing in wider society who aren't part of these structures, who are floating around, who are and therefore what I'm saying is that, you know, this is an enormously wide social issue that we need to get to grips with to understand what the true causes of, and a lot of it probably comes down to you know, inequalities within wider society, financial inequalities partly, and is your investigation, your report, going to range that widely to really understand, you know, the full breadth of causes?
I'm not quite certain what you're referring to there, Mark, because from my understanding, from the work that I've been doing in the portfolio, for example, when talking about a lot of the domestic violence comes from the addiction. So I'm not certain what stresses and strains you're talking about there. Certainly, I don't see my role as Police and Crime Commissioner to try and fix the total spectrum of society's ills. I see my role to keep the people of Dorset safe and to drive for that, and within that, highlight or address those which I can get my arms around. And so I'm not quite certain that firstly, I'm not quite certain what you mean by the stresses and strains on the male people in homes. What I do know is that there is a direct link between addiction and some of the domestic violence that we're seeing.
So I'd just like to make it clear. I'm not trying to be an apologist at all here. All I'm saying that, you know, every action has a reaction, and that the more that wider society becomes unequal, and there are stresses and strains created in it, and part of those stresses and strains are related to, you know, the expectations of males.
Yeah, I think
male groups.
Mark,
it needs to be discovered in the it's a much broader issue. So that if I can just say, you know, that we can do what we want to try and as much as we can to try and make women and girls safe. But there is a whole wider issue of what the causes are, and that is really complicated. And that's a national issue.
Yeah, that's what the PCC has actually outlined. But you've made some very good, valid points there. Moving on, see you're up, Bobby. Did you want to chime in?
I think I did, and I wanted to congratulate both the PCC and the Office of the PCC, both under the Commissioner's stewardship and the previous Commissioner. The most important piece of work they did around domestic violence was understanding that it didn't matter who you were, that you were rich or poor, black or white, gay or straight. It happens, and it happens at every echelon of society, no matter who you are. And I think we really have to understand that there is no shame in it, because it's nothing to do with inequality, it's nothing to do with your circumstances. It happens, and we will be there to support you no matter whatever your personal circumstances are. But thank you, and I think if you could carry on with that campaign, it would be really well appreciated. We know there's trouble out there, and that message still needs to be out there. So thank you very much for your hard work with this.
Thank you, Bobby. Moving on, Toby. Do you have any questions, Toby?
Apologies, my camera doesn't seem to be working at the moment, but no, I don't have any questions at this time.
May.
No further questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Les.
Yeah, just trying to get camera turned on quickly. Commissioner, I note the money that you've donated or supported with the DA and other things like the watch schemes. Is there a timescale on that? Is that a one-off lump sum, or will that cover their funding for a period of years, such as to a year after the next election, so that they know they can plan, they can predict where they're going to go, and make sure that they're still solvent as they move forward?
So when you're talking about my commissioning budget, I'm going to hand that one over to Adam if you want any detail. From the point of view of philosophy, some things we're doing on a significantly long time scale. For example, and Adam can correct me if I've got this piece incorrect, but STARS, I believe, have a 7-year contract. So it will depend. Certainly the Dorset Watches, for example, asked for a significant amount to do 2 things. So I was very, very happy to help them out. But some things we'll do on a one-off, some things we'll do on a longer basis. Adam, do you want to add some stuff to that?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Broadly speaking, that's right. So our long-standing contracts, so the victim support services, this critical contracts that we award are typically on quite a long-term basis. Now, it will vary depending on what seems sensible at the time. So we get advice from Southwest Procurement and other finance experts as to what sort of length of contract should be. But we generally like to go with longer contracts because it gives more stability, as per your question, and it also reduces the burden on the office from doing an exercise again when sometimes you know that the supplier is doing an excellent job and you're very unlikely to change. So for those types of work, yes, we absolutely do have some long contracts to provide that certainty, but we also do one-off bits of funding as well, and that will depend on the request. So the watch scheme that came in and said we'd like a lump sum in order to do some work. So they didn't make a longer request of funding than that, and that's I think perfectly legitimate and sensible as well. We have to bear in mind that the Commissioner's budget is quite limited, the commissioning budget. So quite often the approach as well will be to say that we can't fund everything, but what we will do is give people the sort of first year's funding to get them up and going and see if they can prove the concept and attract other funding. So it really does depend on the circumstances, but we have some long-standing contracts where they're core services, where it's the statutory responsibility of the Commissioner to cover a long time. We do some one-off funding, and we also do some what we call pump priming as well. But certainly with all of the money that we issue, we make it very clear to the organisations what the terms are, what they can expect from us in the future, and what the process will be for any ongoing support.
Adam, thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you. That answers my question quite nicely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bobby?
I have no further questions.
Thanks, Les. Bobby, any questions?
I did, thank you. Moving on and sort of leading on from that commissioning question or statement we had just a minute ago, I note that there's quite a few projects about empowering communities, in particular around ASB, etc. I just wondered, I don't know, it may be early days, but the outcome of that and any success stories, certainly if it's good practice, it'd be good to replicate elsewhere and perhaps in other spheres of work.
So it's a little early for that from the point of view of the Operation Relentless Community Fund. Adam, is there anything you can add from that point of view? I think it's too early to give results from it.
I think that's right. What we tend to find with the small grant schemes in the past is actually once we've awarded the money, it does take a little while because we're typically talking about smaller organisations for them to actually then spend that money and report back. So I would suspect it will be another 6 months or so before we're in a position where we can say they've spent the money and we're starting to get some feedback as to how it's gone. There's a variety of things we've funded, including sort of CCTV and target hardening approaches. So you'd hope by about 6 months' time, I would say, you'd start getting some view of that they've actually installed the cameras, for example, and then what's their anecdotal evidence at the first instance as to whether it works out, and then following that, do we actually have some crime data, etc., to follow on?
Thank you. No further questions.
Thanks, Bobby. Pete Barry.
Thanks, Chair. No further questions.
Thanks very much. Moving on to priority 6 then, make every penny count. George, sorry, you just come in. Sorry, go on before we do that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I realise if we're in danger of time, but there are a couple of questions which I'd like to ask on the other priorities, which I made a note of, which might be beneficial, and there might actually be an action that the Commissioner might wish to take away. Would that be?
Yeah, I apologise. I cut you off. I do apologise.
No, that's absolutely fine. No problem at all, Chair. You're absolutely right. I did have an initial bite at the cherry, but you know me, I'm quite hungry.
I will try and satisfy you, George.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Really appreciate it. Yes, so on priority 1, if we take it back to cutting crime and ASB, let me just refresh myself on my question. Blah, 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 blah. Yes. Oh yes. I really appreciate the influence that yourself and the Office of the Crime and Commissioner has brought to bringing electric scooters to the attention of the police as a priority for antisocial behaviour. In this particular case, I'm still receiving, and I really appreciate the fact that the police have now gone through the 4 E's. So they've done the engagement, they've done the explanation, they've done the encouragement by, handing out the leaflets and so on and so forth. And I really appreciate the fact that they are now doing the fourth one, the enforcement by confiscating scooters. I'm still receiving in my ward, and I'm sure other councillors here will be receiving messages from, again, we're back to those that are not necessarily digital literate, but actually suffer from age-degenerative conditions such as sight and hearing loss, having scooters and bicycles coming up behind them on pavements which are not a shared space. So this is continuing to happen. My question would be, now that we have the police doing the enforcement, how can we request or how can we identify hotspot areas that the public are identifying, perhaps with councillors or other organisations, to actually say, okay, we're going to have a little blitz. We'll have officers on this street corner on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and then we'll move on. And I'm conscious of the fact that when we discussed this, I think Councillor Haynes, as regards public drinking, is the problem moves on to another area. So it's kind of going to be a moving target. So I'd like your views if you got any sort of thoughts how we can continue with the campaign against the illegal use of electric scooters on pavements and bicycles.
So listen, you're absolutely right. If you have that intelligence coming in, George, and you've got effectively a hotspot of e-scooter use, then I would hope that every councillor is now getting a regular contact with their neighbourhood policing team, either with the sergeant or the inspector. And I would ask that you pass it to them, because that very much is an operational issue for the force. And then if you don't get satisfaction, then I'm very happy for you to raise it with me, if you see what I mean. But in the first instance, I would talk to the neighbourhood policing team and say, look, I've got a plethora of people, some of them very vulnerable, exactly the way you've described to me. They're very worried about this area because of e-scooters. Could we do something about it? And in addition to that, on a global level, we will be making more noise about e-scooters, particularly as we go, when the summer starts coming around again and the weather gets a bit better and people are more out and about on them. Yes, we'll be making more noise again. We are talking to the government about what needs to happen, because let's face it, there will be legislation at some stage around these things. But on a very local level, I think that's the best bet, is you talk to your neighbourhood policing team, as you would about other things that you have which concern you.
Absolutely, Commissioner, and I have done on 2 occasions in public meetings and directly. Unfortunately, it's part of the feedback, and it's back to this resourcing again, is that sometimes it is not perhaps the resources are simply not there to make it a priority. So I would appreciate you having some thought as regards how that resourcing could be freed up or made available.
Well, if you've got a particular issue, then by all means let me know, and I'll have a discussion about it.
That's very kind of you. Thank you, Chair. I've got another question on priority 2, if that's acceptable to you within the time frame.
Yep. Briefly.
So we spoke very quickly about making police more visible and connected. It's not all the sunlit uplands and the sunshine and rainbows of 101. I was very pleased to hear that that there was reports that 101 was getting through. Because I'm quite pedantic, and I've sat before on the police improvement panel, particularly around 101, is that I did have a phone call which lasted for 44 minutes and 51 seconds to 101, simply to prove the fact that sometimes it doesn't actually work. The case was resolved within 53 minutes and 7 seconds, and it involved a case of dangerous driving. I got 2 incident reports out of that. One because I wanted to highlight to the supervisor and asked to be highlighted to the supervisor of the 101 to actually dip sample this particular case and why it is that for somebody who only has access to a telephone to contact the police couldn't make a report. Now, nobody apart from myself, to prove a point, would sit on the phone for 44 minutes and 51 seconds before they got an opportunity to explain what the issue was. Would you be in a position, to look into an individual incident number as regards why it is that the performance, and what measures can you take to ensure that the performance of 101 is actually monitored? The example which I'm trying to make is that I believe in the past, if somebody had to wait for a certain period of time, certainly not 44 minutes and 51 seconds, they would receive a letter from the chief constable to explain why it is that it had gone wrong. I wondered if you might want to consider working with the police for the customer engagement and the customer connection to actually apologize for when the systems don't work and have a mechanism which can be automated so that if somebody is held up for a long time, then they can be contacted by somebody senior to explain what went wrong on that particular day.
Thank you, George. Well, let me reassure you, there is somebody who will wait on for that period of time. I did for 45 minutes. That was the first trigger for me standing for election. Look, this is something which we know that we've got to get right and we've got to get better, but it's a wider thing than just 101. It is a cultural change that needs to happen around something which, coming from a business background, I'm very keen on, which is called customer service. And that's exactly what you're talking about. So I take this wider. This customer service needs to be embedded from the first instance of reporting. It needs to be embedded on coming back to somebody who's got an incident running. And where there is a service failure, which is what you're saying there needs to be a mechanism where it comes back to the customer. So there are things which have happened, but they are since Q2. So I'm not going to report on them now, but I will report on them in the future.
I appreciate that greatly. And if I may, Chair, I've got one last question on rural crime.
Go on, George.
Thank you very much for your indulgence, Chair. You mentioned in rural crime when there was a discussion as regards what was classed as a rural crime, and you mentioned hair coursing, and there's not a great deal of hair coursing happening in Boscombe, which happens to be my ward. I'd be quite alarmed if there was. But one of the things which has changed recently is that there has been a conviction for trail hunting, and that trail hunting with the use of dogs by hunting groups has been identified as being in the words of the judge, a smokescreen. So the hunting with dogs continues to happening under the guise of trail hunting. Trail hunting, for those of the public that don't know, is essentially under the Hunting Act. Then you can't hunt wildlife with dogs, but trail hunting is whereby a scent is laid early in the morning, and then the hunts go out and they follow that particular trail. There has been a court case where that's been found to be false and misleading information. That's resulted in the fact that the National Trust have actually banned trail hunting on their land, and I'll get to the point, Chair, very, very shortly. A lot of landowners in Dorset have also taken consideration to banning that. A lot of councils are raising motions whereby trail hunting will be banned, e.g. the licence to continue trail hunting would not be renewed on their land up and down the country, not just in Dorset. But the MOD have not. Would your office, 2 questions. One, what is your view on the hunting with dogs? And 2, would your office be in a position to encourage the MOD to reconsider the granting of licensing for trail hunting on Dorset MOD property?
So let me be very clear about this one, and this question has come up a number of times. It is not my job to change legislation. It is my job to hold the police accountable for upholding the law. And in this space, I'm very clear. Trail hunting, as it stands, is legal. Fox hunting isn't. And therefore, that's where I stand. That is what I hold the police accountable to do. But it is not within my purview to change the legislation or indeed to take a view on changing that legislation. So from the point of view of your first question about trail hunting, if it is conducted totally in the way it's meant to be, it's a legal sport. If, however, people fox hunt, they'll be prosecuted and convicted. That's where I am on it.
Thank you for that.
And if I may, Chair, would you, and I appreciate it's not necessarily in your purview, would you have a view on the MOD following that line whereby trail hunting is legal, but the MOD don't have the opportunity, and I don't believe the police have the opportunity to prosecute and convict should fox hunting occur on their land?
I'm afraid that's a question you have to ask the MOD, George.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks for your indulgence.
Thank you. Moving on to priority 6, making every penny count.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, so making every penny count, which again has to be a thread which runs through all the other priorities. Look, I'm very clear. If I can just give you a philosophical take where I am about making every penny count, and it talks to something which came up earlier, actually, from Sherry. I'm very clear that there are 2 parts to this. One part is I lobby and make it very clear what Dorset needs upwards in order to get as many grants, a review of the national funding formula, all those things which we need to be done. But I'm also very clear that within Dorset, we make the absolute most of every penny we've got. So for the first sort of point about this quarter, there was a couple of things I'd like to highlight. I mean, one of the things was actually it was this quarter, which we needed to move quickly in order to make certain that we had somebody in order to address the efficiencies within the force with me, which is a new chief constable. So this was when we were able to confirm Scott Chilton as the chief constable with the help of the police and crime panel and your view on that as well. So that's one of the things we did. The other thing we did was I also received a briefing on next year's Hmic FRS inspections. And for those who are eagle-eyed, you'll notice that the target for efficiency assessment by Hmic FRS is adequate, and currently we're good. And the reason for this is they are rebasing. They have widened the categories now, and they are rebasing how they look at forces in that regard. And we have seen what's happened with other forces where those which were originally good have now moved into some adequates, some goods, etc. So in a way like Ofsted did a few years ago, they've actually widened their parameters. And we're anticipating that that may happen with us. We are going through an Hmic FRS inspection at this moment in time. And both I and the Chief Constable welcome that because that gives us a benchmark. Whatever happens, that gives us a benchmark and it gives us basically where we're going forward. So I just thought I'd make that note there in case anybody thought we were horrendously going backwards, which we're not. The other point was about in green around evidence-based policing. I got very excitable when I heard that the government were coming out with a beating crime plan for cutting crime across England and Wales. But I was very pleased because, as you will know from my answer earlier, I moved apace in order to make certain that we absolutely were getting the policing crime plan in place as much as possible. And there was an extremely strong synergy between the beating crime plan and the policing crime plan that we developed. So I'm very pleased about that. It means that now, and I see it being a huge benefit for the people of Dorset going forward, is we have a government which is on the same page as PCCs driving for safer areas. So I just wanted to make those 2 points around that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. It's gone. And
I was going to say, there is a Q2 financial report as well. I'd ask you to basically talk, we'll get Julie to talk to that if you want to go into that in detail.
Julie, very briefly, could you just talk for members of the public through finance brief?
Yeah, of course, Chair. So the finance pages show where we are as at the end of September, so Q2. And in terms of the revenue budget, that's showing an improved position. At the end of Q1, we were showing an adverse variance of 327,000. That's now reduced down to 188,000. So very much following the traditional pattern of kind of adverse at the start and then improving as we go through the year, which was slightly different last year because of COVID. So an improved position, still adverse at the moment, but I'm confident with the actions the force are taking that will come back down on budget. In terms of the capital programme, again, we've, through the capital strategy group, keep enforcing, reviewing exactly where programmes are, whether they're slipping, etc., and address that at the point that they're identified. So there has been a bit more slippage that's been taken out of the programme, built into next year's capital programme. And beyond, etc. There are a couple of projects where we've reviewed them. They don't qualify as capital projects, so they've been moved into the revenue budget. That doesn't cause any financial issues in the current year because they were funded from the revenue contribution anyway. So the capital programme appears on track. There are some savings that have been identified at the point at the end of September, but we have got some pressures that are in there that are coming to fruition. So we've got quite a significant unallocated budget, which we're thinking that over the next 2 quarters we may have to use in order to complete some of those projects that are in. That's predominantly coming from pressures of materials that we're all seeing. You go and buy wood or anything, it's significantly more expensive than perhaps when these budgets were originally produced. So overall, a comfortable position at the minute, moving in the right direction is how I would kind of sum up the overall finances.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Julie. Whilst you're there, two detailed questions, if I may. Do any of the variances impact positively or negatively on assumptions plans in the medium-term financial plan for 22-23 and beyond?
So predominantly the bigger variations, particularly with income and pay and employees costs, they are predominantly impacted from once-off occurrences. So particularly the G7 summit and the COP26 events where we've supplied significant mutual aid resources in this year. That's obviously unlikely. Those specific events won't happen again next year, and that's where most of the variances occurring in the current year. There are some ongoing impacts, so things where we've seen a couple of contract areas where there have been higher than planned increases, which obviously impacts on future years, particularly around IT contracts and our contributions to the National Police Air Service. So they're being factored in. And obviously the increases in fuel and energy costs that we're all seeing as well are being factored in. But the main discussions on that area are how long is that significant increase going to last across the medium-term financial plan? So we're kind of obviously more certain about the impacts on next year. That's being built into the budget and is a pressure. But it's now we're currently in the process of discussing how long does that pressure stay at that same rate for future years. So a bit of crystal ball gazing and trying to see what's most reasonable. But in the main, most of the variances are contained to this financial year.
And you see that crystal ball clearing firmly by February next year?
Well, we'll come up with an assumption which we believe is reasonable, but yeah, it will still be guesses.
Yeah, final detailed question from me before we move on to the more strategic stuff. Forecast reduction in reserves, still enough to provide resilience?
Yep, so we have the guidance range of keeping our revenue general reserves between 3 and 5%. Even with the forecast adverse variance, that would still be within that limit. So I'm comfortable that reserves are still adequate. Now, obviously, as a treasurer, I would always want reserves to be a bit higher, bit more resilience. But clearly, as we go through the recovery from the COVID economic impact, things like collection funds may well be turning into surpluses, and we would potentially look over the course of the medium-term financial plan to increase those reserves up a little bit, but they're not a cause for concern at this point. It's still within our 3 to 5% and comfortably within that 3% threshold. So comfortable about the financial resilience.
Once again, we'll go through the detail on that with a fine-tooth comb as part of the precept briefing.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much for that. Moving on to some more strategic stuff. It's been in the media and the panel is aware that the new police headquarters has been announced, or a new build for police headquarters has been announced, i.e. the plans have, whether it goes ahead or not. It is accepted that most, if not all, other buildings from the 1960s era have been demolished already because they did not meet the modern standards, and erecting new buildings is more economic. And this particular building we're talking about, the current headquarters, I understand was built in 1959. Can the PCC please provide a rough detail on timelines? And I accept fully that it is a rough detail because the plans have just been announced and they've not even been endorsed yet. And how you, I think the key thing is how you intend to sell this capital project to the taxpaying public. David.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I think the issue we have is this is not just a police headquarters. Obviously, that has basically been the thing which people talk about because you have to put planning permission into it. You will know very clearly that priority 2 for me is about increasing visibility, engagement and connectivity with the public. And so there is a whole raft of work going on around the estates in order to increase that visibility and connectivity with the public. Part of it is addressing the issues we have with things like the police headquarters, and I'll go into that in more detail in a moment. But it is also about making certain that we review the police stations. It is also about looking at front offices. It is making certain that we are fit for purpose going forward to operate, but also to be better connected with the public. So it's not just the police HQ in isolation, it's a whole raft of review in order to look at that. So for the benefit of those who may not have seen the recent announcement, Chief Constable and I have basically recently agreed a programme of investment in the police estate. This covers both upgrades and improvements to local police stations, as well as the decision to replace the HQ itself, and as discussed, a review of other things such as front offices. The investment in local stations such as better technology, more lockers and flexible working spaces means that basically the officers will reduce their time in stations each shift, plus will provide respite areas to help them deal with the aftermath of traumatic incidents. The whole concept we're going forward with is we want our police officers out there. We want them keeping the people safe, and this is what we're trying to do. So the current police buildings that are in operation beyond their planned lifespan will be disposed of, and in particular, we have a problem because the 60-year-old headquarters building at Hmicfrs costs more to maintain than it would to knock it down and replace with a more energy efficient and sustainable building. So that's why we're replacing this. The timelines for this are that planning permission was formally sought last month. We hope for a decision by February 2022. If this is granted as hoped for, we expect to break ground around June 2022, and that the building will be completed by the end of 2023. Members of this panel, like the Dorset public at large, will start to see a range of communications on this project in the new year. And I confirm that I'm intending a high level of transparency around this project once the initial commercial arrangements have been confirmed, and so we will say more in due course. But I want to emphasise again, this is not just about a police HQ. This is about making Dorset Police more connected with the public.
Thank you very much for that. Final question from me, which the public will obviously be asking themselves, is how do you intend to fund this project? And key from a panel's perspective, ensure value for money for the Dorset taxpayer?
Okay, well, I think it'll probably be really helpful if to aid everybody's understanding, we start with a bit of myth busting. So investment in capital assets like buildings, such as the police estates, don't take away funds from the funding of police officers. So this is a capital, basically this is a capital asset, it's not a revenue cost. In terms of the question itself, police and crime commissioners, like other public bodies, are able to secure loans through the Public Works Loan Board, a HM Treasury-backed body that exclusively lends funds to public bodies at preferential rates in order to maximise taxpayer value. Our financial assessments therefore highlight a modest cost to the Dorset taxpayer over the potential loan period. In comparison with the cost of keeping the current headquarters building fit for occupation, which is essentially dead money, as investment will not improve the residual value of the building, the relative affordability of a loan is a favourable option. Again, Chair, I will provide more detail on this once the building plans have been finalised and the commercial negotiations are complete and we've got the detail.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Dave. In fact, you've stolen my thunder to slightly. Now is not the time for in-depth questions on any of this, from me or from the panel for that matter. But we will put this on the forward work plan. We will do a deep dive on it in order to ensure that the taxpayer, the Dorset taxpayer, is getting value for money, because capital is funded by revenue and revenue is funded by the taxpayer. So, because the capital budget that you get from the government is fairly limited. But
that's why we're going for a loan.
Yes, exactly. So I hear what you're saying. I'm not going to say any more. It's too early yet, but we will do a deep dive, and we won't be looking at your business cases. We'll be seeking assurance that you've done due diligence on the whole process.
And I'm very happy with that, Mike, and I will be.
Okay, thank you. Les, I see you want to say something.
Yeah, having worked in that building personally, it is due for a change. It does need a modernisation, and that's all I'm going to say. It's dire.
All right, thanks, Les. Pete, you want to just briefly, very briefly, please?
Yeah, it's very brief. Obviously, the PCC is probably aware that fire service and the police are sharing some sites like Lyme Regis and Portland. And from what he's just said previously, I just like to pass on a comment. I hope that the police and fire are taking every opportunity to cooperate going forward.
Absolutely. That's why we're having a comprehensive review of the estates as a whole. We're looking at all options.
Okay, thanks very much for that. People are piling in. Briefly, and I mean briefly, and I'm not really looking for any questions, if you wouldn't mind.
It's not a question. It's an action, please, that when we do that deep dive, that we look at that asset management sort of audit that you're doing, but B, on the suitability of having headquarters at Hmicfrs.
Okay. Yep. Yes, enough said. Thank you. Anybody got any more points on that? No, good. Then I'd like to move on, if you wouldn't mind, to the item 5, which is the precept for the financial year 21-22. Just as a bit of background, obviously the panel endorsed the precept uplift in February this year. We wrote to the PCC highlighting certain areas that we would want to see where this funding and resource would be utilised. A lot of that data came from national direction as well. So I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to hand over to Dave to talk us through the letter that we sent you and the response that you provided in your report. Thank you.
So thank you very much indeed. As this is basically talking primarily around a precept which I wasn't party to, I wasn't here, and how it's been utilised. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pass across to Simon, who's been here for the whole process, and ask my Chief Executive to give you the update. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chair. As the Commissioner said, I'll take this item as it refers to delivery against the previous Police and Crime Plan under the auspices of the previous Police and Crime Commissioner. And on behalf of the previous PCC and the people of Dorset, I thank the panel for their previous and their continued support. Chair, OPCC has previously produced a closure report in respect of delivery against the previous Police and Crime Plan, and members considered this at the last meeting. What's been requested today is an outline of how the precept increase for 2021-22 proposed by the previous PCC and agreed by the panel in February of this year has been utilised. Just to remind members, so the precept increase was £15 for a Band D property, in line with the government proposal. As a result of the strain caused by the pandemic, the tax base was slightly reduced as the number of people claiming local council tax support had increased and the collection rates had reduced. Chair, at the time, the then PCC summarised the £15 precept increase as follows, and I quote, on the face of it, I would understand why some may think £15 is a huge settlement for Dorset Police. Actually, it enables us to achieve a balanced budget, police a pandemic, and support the officer uplift programme, covering the additional costs in the programme. End quote. Chair, the paper provides members hopefully with an overview of how precept has been used in the first half of the year and sits alongside the usual reports presented here regarding to the delivery of the Police and Crime Plan, which of course utilises resources from both the force and the OPCC commissioning budget to deliver activities. Just to briefly pick out a few highlights in response to the panel request. So on local resources, the recruitment of our allocation of 49 additional officers in year 2 of the uplift programme remains well on track. And indeed, the Police and Crime Commissioner and Chief Constable took the decision to front-load recruitment at the beginning of the year to maximise the impacts of the new officers. Likewise, this recruitment also included 2 officers for the Regional Organised Crime Unit, and additional resources have been provided to the ROCU from across the region by all 5 regional Police and Crime Commissioners and Chief Constables to ensure that it is able to counter the growth of serious organised crime, particularly issues such as county lines, fraud, rural crime and cybercrime. In terms of crime reduction, compared to the 2019-2020 baseline, there's been a 6% reduction overall, and a fuller breakdown is provided in paragraph 2.3. The panel letter also asked about procurement, and the report notes that Dorset Police has signed up to the Blue Light Commercial Enterprise and is fully utilising the contract which has been let in respect of the national purchase of police vehicles. Other procurement continues to be coordinated across the region through the South West Police Procurement Department, which now covers all 5 regional forces and allows a single approach across the region, which significantly increases our purchasing power. In terms of the delivery of operational policing, section 3 of the paper focuses on local issues and outlines the progress made due to the precept increase across areas like local policing, rural crime, youth justice, hate crime, contact management and ASB, all the areas that have been requested in the panel's letter, and so I don't propose to read those out. And finally, in section 4, the paper covers off the other areas of assurance requested in relation to capital strategy, the lobbying work undertaken by OPCC, and in relation to mental health, Chair, I refer members back to the paper on health and wellbeing that was tabled about a year ago, so last December, and confirmed that the various wellbeing initiatives designed to address both physical and mental resiliency continued in the first half of 2021-22, as we reported at the time. Chair, I'm very happy to answer any questions, but I do hope the paper provides a suitable summary of how the 2021-22 precept has been used in the first half of this year to deliver the objectives of the previous police and crime plan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Simon. I'm going to offer this up to the panel to see if they've got any points, and then I've got a couple of questions I wouldn't mind asking, but hopefully the panel might beat me to it. Pete. Pete Barrow?
Delay. Yes, having trouble unmuting. Nothing to add, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sherry?
No questions, thank you, Chair.
Mark?
No, thanks.
Toby?
No, thank you, Chair.
May?
Sorry,
Yes.
having trouble with the mute button. No questions, thank you, Chair.
Thanks, May. Les?
No questions, thanks, Chair.
George?
Thankfully, Chair, no questions.
Bobby?
No, thank you.
Dave, you're back.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, but no questions.
I've got a couple of questions, if you wouldn't mind. The report sets out quite clearly at the start, your report, that this is a new PCC, new Chief Constable, new plan against a precept that was inherited from the outgoing PCC. I suppose, has the substance of delivery changed significantly during the year?
I think, Chair, I'd say yes or no. You happy with that, or do you want a bit more?
I'd like a bit more if you wouldn't mind.
I think on the yes part, there's obviously been a significant change in prioritisation, and I'm sure members of the public even will also have noted a renewed focus on areas such as cutting crime and ASB, to mention a single example around the first priority. However, whilst delivery has significantly changed since May of this year, this has been an incremental change rather than a big bang approach. So what we've done is initially concentrate on policy and systems changes in the first instance to deliver that change. Joe, I think it would be unwise of us to try and land wholesale change in delivery across an organisation as large and as complex as Dorset Police without first taking some smaller steps. And these smaller steps also quite handily don't necessarily cost money. So what we're doing is we're taking some ideas around some policy changes, some shifts of viewpoints, and effecting change that way, rather than actually having to go out and spend additional money to refocus. The other relevant factor, Chair, in achieving efficient delivery is that policing doesn't deliver within a vacuum. Therefore, there is a real need for OPCC to align our activity with our statutory and our non-statutory delivery partners. And you couple that with a raft of internal and external governance processes, which all means that changes in policing delivery, whilst they will be really manifest and really meaningful, they have to be delivered in a considerate and measured approach. So at this stage, very, very early on in having a new police and crime plan, the activity we've undertaken is producing and publishing that police and crime plan, which has allowed for those new priorities and those new objectives to be widely discussed, disseminated, socialised, both internally within the force and externally with our partners. And we fully expect in the long term that will deliver a far more effective and efficient way of delivery in the long term.
Okay, thank you for that, Simon. Thank you for that full answer. 3.3 talks about crime resolution. Performance has proved steady throughout the first 6 months of this financial year. We know, based on reports in the press and also paperwork that's been issued, that in actual fact it's come down nationally, and including in Dorset, I believe it's 7.1% at the moment. Joe, could you give us a view on that, or would you like Dave to answer that?
I don't know if the Commissioner wants to come in on positive outcome rates, or
yeah, I'll talk about that. It goes to the heart of where we want to go in the future. So
yeah, I suppose. Sorry to interrupt you then, Dave. The key question is, what are you going to be doing in order to improve it?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, it goes without saying, I'd like to see more investigations result in positive outcomes. I'm sure that every PCC and Chief Constable in the country would echo that sentiment. But positive outcomes are not limited just to charges and summons. There's a range of other measures, such as cautions, fixed penalty notices, and use of restorative justice, for instance. And it can be used successfully and proportionately to conclude an investigation. So if that is a way to reduce reoffending in the future, if that's a way in order to get justice for the victims, then I'm quite comfortable with that. The latest figures for Dorset suggest a positive outcome rate of about 10.2% compared to the national average of 10.7%. So whilst it's moving, it's not what the public would expect. It's not what I would expect. We need to move it forward. That's the national picture. We are, if we compare ourselves with our forces, we're middling with that number. So it's very complicated. There's a wide range of factors at play, such as police resourcing. But you know that I believe the Uplift programme will help forces to make headway. Second issue is the efficiency of the court system and the need to focus on the most sophisticated forensic and investigative capability on those crimes that cause the most harm. So look, let me say three things to you as chair of the panel, but also to the public. I want this to be improved. I will be holding the Chief Constable to account for the performance in this area. And as chair of the Criminal Justice Board, I'll be working to bring partners together so we can secure more positive outcomes. Basically, at the moment, the Criminal Justice Board has a number of the bodies involved. So things like probation, things like prisons, things like courts, things like judiciary, the CPS, magistrates. And it is a matter of getting that to work together like a Swiss clock at the same time as holding the chief accountable for what we're doing in order to get the outcomes up from the police end. So the positive outcome data doesn't capture by any means the full story. The huge efforts that the police put into safeguarding victims of crime are reflected in these figures. So while it may be a case that a crime has not been formally solved, that's not to say that there hasn't been a lot of vital work to protect the victims from repeat incidents and provide crucial support services. In other words, don't let figures such as these put you off from calling the police in a time of need. They are here to help. And as I said before, this is one part of the components which we're using in order to drop reoffences and look after victims. But let's absolutely not underestimate the benefit of good intelligence. Many crimes are committed by a small minority of offenders. We know that. It might be the case that the police can't solve, for example, every shed break or bike theft. But by building up that information, it will help the police to catch burglars and thieves, put in place preventative patrols and action, and also issue advice to our communities. So for a simple example, somebody might report in that they've seen a suspicious car in an area, and they give the colour. Somebody else down the road might have caught the registration plate. So again, my advice is always to come forward and report crimes to the police. It drives their ability in order to get a positive outcome, catch the guys doing it. It allows them also to basically put in place resources if they can see a stream of things happening in an area. So please report and come forward.
Thank you very much for that. And you have stolen the point I was actually going to make, that obviously the people of Dorset will be expecting you as their representative to lobby in order to improve this figure. So, absolutely.
And we're going to keep on howling about it.
So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to move on to item 6, which is stop and search. A little bit of background for the public. The panel conducted scrutiny on this area in September 2020, and the issue is disproportionality in the use of stop and search in Dorset. This is the follow-up that we said that we wanted to do in order to identify what action has been taken by the PCC, OPCC, in order to improve this situation. Whilst the panel has read the report, for the benefit of the public, could you just talk us through it, if you wouldn't mind, Dave, please?
Yes, absolutely. And Chair, I welcome the ability to do that. I'm going to do it in some detail because this topic actually is one which A, I care deeply about, and B, I know that is really, really important to people. So first of all, by way of introduction, let me sort of outline what the issue is. Dorset Police has been the national outlier for stop and search disproportionality against black people for well over a decade. The most recently published national dataset for the 12 months ending 31st of March 2021 show that Dorset Police are 19.5 times more likely to stop and search black people than white people, compared to a national average of 7 times more likely. So basically, what we know is that there is an issue around disproportionality. If I clarify what I mean by stop and search by taking a paragraph on that. A stop and search is when a police officer stops an individual or group and searches them, their clothing, and or anything they may be carrying. Officers can only use this power when they have good reason to suspect that the individual may be carrying illicit items such as drugs, weapons, or stolen property, items that may be used to commit a crime, or where a certain power has been put in place to cover a particular area at a particular time to prevent crime. Officers are required to have good reasons for the stop and search based on facts, information, or intelligence. Stop and search is widely regarded by policing as a valuable tool to prevent crime, particularly that of an organised or violent nature. Now, I'd like to pick up on another paragraph, which talks to the issue around communities and the view of stop and search. So, a further complicating factor involves the trust, confidence, and outcome of BAME individuals at a national level when engaging with the wider criminal justice system. Specifically in relation to policing, these issues are well established, from the 1981 Scarman report into the Brixton disturbances, the 1999 Hmicfrs report into the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence, through the Lammy review and the race disparity audit, both published in 2017, and also contemporary global racial injustice highlighted, for example, by the Black Lives Matter movement. Whilst local delivery remains local, it's also critical that Dorset Police considers its powers of stop and search and the environmental context in which those powers are used simultaneously. So we have this issue in that we have an effective tool to address violent and organised crime, and we have an issue where we have a loss of trust around how this tool is used. So I'm very clear that when we have disproportionality, as I've outlined, basically we need to understand and address it. So I'm very acutely aware of the history and previous scrutiny on this issue. And since I've been elected in May 2021, I've been working with the force to understand the reasons for this enduring disproportionality. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this in some detail, because I think it's important that the panel and the public have confidence that I am looking at this in detail in order to address it. So what I did immediately was I reviewed the outstanding PCC challenge around stop and search disproportionality. And I decided very clearly that I wanted this to remain open. At that time, I was told that the force had commissioned 2 pieces of external work, and the results of these were communicated to me by the Chief Constable in early September. During this intervening period, I remained proactive and we pressed the force for the output of this work, formally tabling actions at the Joint Leadership Board and the Disproportionality Board. Once we received the information, both I and my Chief Executive provided detailed feedback. And whilst I was grateful and noted this was not an issue that could be solved overnight, I was compelled to ask more questions. In particular, whether it spanned external factors with the Dorset population and the offenders within intent on causing harm in our communities, and internal factors such as force standards, practices, policies, and people. So I'm very clear that we have to have an overarching, fully encompassing look at this issue. And what I did in early October was I went back to the Chief Constable, reiterating that force must bring to a conclusion the actual understanding of that disproportionality. And having done that, have measures in place to address potential discrimination. And we needed to take steps to communicate these as effectively as we needed to do. So whilst recognising the significant amount of work and actions taken to date, I remained not sufficiently assured that the recommended steps were enough to deliver change. So basically, what I did was I asked for a comparative analysis of areas with similar issues, and assurance that the force legitimacy governance was fit for purpose, that force internal processes were sufficient to address the issues found, and that meaningful engagement and connectivity with our diverse communities took place. In late October, the force published the 2 commissioned pieces of stop and search research, along with a summary of the report. At the time of writing, I want the issues that I've outlined to basically be sorted, and the challenge will remain open until they have been. Now, one of the things I wanted to do was make certain that we, as I said, we have an encompassing view. So if I move to the use of police powers and standards scrutiny panel, I inherited a small number of independent scrutiny panels, which included representation from both members of the public and in some instances from the police and crime panel. What I asked for was a review of these panels, and upon doing so, decided to coalesce some of the existing panels together into a new overarching panel, which will scrutinise the use of police powers and standards. So that is called UPS, UPPS. The intention for the UPS panel is that complex issues such as disproportionality can be considered in one place, rather than in lots of different forums in which wider trends might not be picked up. It was also intended that the new panel should have a more diverse membership. And to facilitate this, the OPC undertook a range of additional steps to maximise the visibility of the recruitment advert, including targeted marketing through social media and community radio. This panel will be established before the end of the year and in fact meets next week, and will continue to consider the wider environmental context around stop and search delivery. For example, changes to national guidance and policy, issues, concerns and high profile cases, which will allow us to learn from other force areas. Also, it will review Dorset Police stop and search performance, including recent statistics on population and disproportionality profiles, the object of search, crime enabling article, drugs, weapons, etc., and fine rates. So the proportion of times the object being searched for was found. It will also undertake dip sampling of body worn video from stop and search cases picked at random by the force tactical leads according to criteria set by the scrutiny panel, such as the focus on young people or drug stops where the subject was arrested, for example. The UPS panel will have better representation from senior management of Dorset Police and the OPCC. It will continue to be attended by the Dorset Police tactical leads for stop and search, and panel members will continue to raise any concerns, challenges and successes to the PCC to support him, i.e. me, in his scrutiny of the Chief Constable. Panel members will also continue to benefit from other opportunities to support their scrutiny, such as observing the training provided to officers on stop and search, unconscious bias or restraint techniques, or attending ride-alongs to directly observe the challenges officers encounter in the delivery of their duties. So we're making certain that this panel has real-world experience as well as sitting to look at what's been going on. When it comes to the current position, where I am with this is that both I, as the PCC, Dorset Police and the OPCC, we're going to continue to treat stop and search disproportionality as a priority improvement area. And I'm going to continue to advocate strongly and offer challenge to Dorset Police Chief Officers. So I've been very clear as to what's needed, and I'm going to keep challenging until we get there, until we actually are able to go forward around this issue. So I hope that makes sense, and I appreciate that summary was detailed, Chair, but I wanted to go through it in some detail in order to provide reassurance around my determination that this issue will be addressed.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Dave. I'm conscious that the Chief Exec has also been involved in this heavily over the years now. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to ask Simon his view on this subject as well.
Thank you, Chair. I think from my perspective, obviously this debate has been had by at the panel a number of times, and if I reflect on the many previous conversations we've had about this and try and take a strategic perspective, I think for me it kind of boils down to two possible elephants being in the room. The first being whether, exactly as the Commissioner has just outlined, whether Dorset Police's approaches to addressing issues of potential disproportionality around stop and search are having the desired impact. But then I also make the wider point really, which is whether the stop and search issue is a standalone anomaly or whether it's symptomatic of a wider problem. So, on the first elephant, Chair, it's been the OPCC's enduring position that the force's approach to stop and search is fundamentally wrong, and the Commissioner has already highlighted where he's asked for additional work to be done and highlighted additional issues and queries that he's asked the force for. I think from my perspective as the OPCC Chief Exec, I've been quite disappointed that over the years the force hasn't really engaged OPCC, particularly at this level. So OPCC over the years has made numerous suggestions, we've given advice, we've been prepared to work collaboratively with the force to help them and to us better understand and address the position. But actually that hasn't really materialised, and OPCC has found itself in a kind of a remarkably unhelpful loop really of continual defence and criticism, with the force and the OPCC positions becoming quite entrenched. And unfortunately the outcome of that is that no real tangible difference is being made to the stop and search disproportionality rates, which is evidenced by the data presented today. And I'm happy, Chair, to talk about the second elephant, but potentially I wanted to talk about stop and search really. So if you wanted to get into kind of wider areas, then
no, I think that's fine. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. I'm going to open this up to the panel for questions if they've got any. George.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just forming a question at the moment, so perhaps I can come back in just a moment.
Okay, yeah. Toby.
No, thank you, Chair.
Mark Howe.
No, thanks.
No, thank you. Pete.
Nothing to ask at the moment, Chair.
Les.
I think May's going to ask the question that I'm in support of, but I wait to see the outcome of all this research and work that's done on this.
Okay, thank you for that, Les. Dave?
Yeah, happy to wait as well for the research, and no questions at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May?
Thank you, Chair. It wasn't really a question, it was more a comment that in the report it says, understandably, that the stats are actually based on the census from 2011. So we're talking about using data sets that's now 10 years old. Earlier this year, the new census had happened, and obviously we haven't got the refresh data from that. So I guess my comment is I look forward to seeing whether using the latest set of data might actually put a different perspective on what we're seeing before us. But nonetheless, like everyone else, I actually look forward to seeing the further work and the outcome of the further work that's already been planned for this. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, May. Dave?
Yeah, if I can just respond to that, May, thank you for that. You're absolutely right. And this is why I am pushing to make certain that we have the analysis that we need in order to understand this issue. Simon very eloquently put the history around this. I'm very clear that we need to get this bottomed out and go forward. So that's why I'm making certain that I am asking the right questions. And if the analysis comes to me and there's still questions around it, I will keep asking those questions until I am happy that we've got to the bottom of it. So I think that was a really good shout what you said, and that's part of the equation.
Thanks very much. May, any follow-up?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Sherry?
Yes, just very briefly, Chair, and this stop me if this is not particularly helpful, but given that the history of this and that this has been running for a very long time, I wonder at what point it might be appropriate to put some timescales on this as to when you expect to have these responses and when it will be coming back to this committee, because it seems to me that and I'm newish to this panel, but it seems to me this has been drifting on for a decade, and maybe this is the moment when we say enough is enough, and we need to have some answers. So I just leave that thought with you, not to add to your pressures.
No, Sherry, thank you very much indeed. I am hoping that I have bottomed out the analysis completely within the first quarter of next year. And I'm hoping that we'll be in a better position to have a discussion around it, because there will be no more analysis that I require.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. Good question. In fact, you stole mine. Bobby.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think based on what Sherry was just saying just now, I think we will put this on the forward work plan for next year, back end of next year again, in order to see how we're improving. And obviously, if you can come back to the panel beforehand with a satisfactory, with a response that satisfies you primarily,
thank you.
Then we will obviously review that situation later on. Right, I'm going to move on, unless anybody's got any other further points. No, going to move on to item 7, complaints verbal update. Ian's not here today, so Mark, could you lead on this by any chance?
No problem at all, Chair. And quite a quick and easy one today. We've got no open complaints at this point in time. There is a meeting of the complaints subcommittee, though, scheduled for the 6th of January 2022. That's not to review complaints at this point in time, but more so to have a review, as is usually the case once a year, on the actual complaints policy. So that's it for a complaints update.
Thanks very much for that. Staying with you, Mark, forward work plan.
Thank you, Chair. So the committee papers include with it the forward work schedule for the panel. Just really drawing to attention the fact that particularly once we get to June 22, it's quite an onerous agenda for the panel. I think the suggestion has been made that we look to use one of the informal meetings that the panel has to challenge that work plan in a bit more detail. So I wasn't going to raise anything in any great detail this afternoon. Today, if that's okay, Chair.
That's very kind of you. It would be really appreciated, Dave. I didn't mention this early on, so I do apologise. If a member of your staff could support the panel when we go through the forward work plan, in order to ensure there's a balanced and equitable view, shall we say.
I think that makes perfect sense.
Thank you very much. Right then, there are no urgent items to the best of my knowledge. There is no exempt business, so I'm not going to go through the whole panel again, name by name, but if anybody's got any points they'd like to raise, then please put your camera on and we can go through them. May.
No, Chair. I have nothing to raise.
Put
my camera on by mistake.
Bit of finger problem there. Okay, I'm still waiting. If nobody's got any points they'd like to raise, then the next meeting. Yep, George.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to take away in any way, shape, or form from the research that is going into the stop and search and the disproportionality, but I did have a question from a resident, which I'd like to ask, and it kind of touches upon what the Commissioner actually identified, is that police officers can only stop with a good reason or intelligence-led and a variety of other criteria. The individual concerned is concerned about drug dealing with the use of bicycles, which we're quite familiar with, but also drug dealing now with the use of electric scooters, and we're back there again. There was a post by the Bournemouth Police on social media, and I encourage and praise the Dorset Police in their variety of different forms, from neighbourhood to no excuse, to actually use social media for their success stories. From yesterday, which actually says a mobile patrol passed a suspicious event. A foot chase of the individual on a bicycle followed, and that led to the discovery of Class A drugs, and a possession charge is now being investigated. 4 collar numbers were mentioned in that post. I'm just trying to formulate the question, because this individual is of a generation, and also from a life experience where he served in the force before, is that the stop and search on suspicion of a behaviour based around the use of a bicycle or an e-scooter, in this particular case, looks like on the face of it got a result. And I don't want to stray into operational matters, but I'd perhaps just like the Commissioner's view on the fact that the modus operandi for individuals dealing that people may well see on a common basis on the street, to encourage those reports to go back to the police so that they can be actioned. Because in this particular case, it was a mobile patrol that went, "Don't like the look at that, oi," and then a foot chase, and then a successful detention, and an investigation is now ongoing. I just wanted your view, Commissioner, on the use of bicycles and scooters for drug use, and whether or not you would class that, and again, it's an operational question, is it a good enough reason for a police officer to inquire, to say, I would like to search you because you're riding a bicycle, or you're going from individual to individual. Anyway, I'd ask the question on behalf of the resident because that's their concern. What they want to ask is, what more can the police do for what is identified, or in the public's perception, that there are deals going on that involve bicycles and the use of electric scooters.
So, thank you, George. Well, firstly, I'm very pleased that they did that stop. I'm very pleased they've taken some Class A drugs off the call. And that's exactly what I would want Dorset police officers to be doing. Regarding the use of bicycles and e-scooters, look, I'm not saying everybody who's on a bike and everybody who's on an e-scooter is a bad person dealing drugs. We can't say that. What I will say, though, is it would be a lot easier if e-scooters had proper registration numbers like scooters. And that is something which I am campaigning for, along with other PCCs, in order to make that law. So regarding your question, yes, I would ask people to report if they are worried about something. If they think somebody's drug dealing, then please report to the police, and then they can mount operations to try and keep our place safe. I'll say two things around this, though. I don't want to go back into the 101 discussion from earlier, but reporting by email or online is obviously easier, take into account those issues that we talked about earlier. Also, if they're worried about staying anonymous, then I would suggest Crime Stoppers, which also around drugs is a very useful way of getting that information across. The police need that information in order to build intelligence about what's going on. And as we're very clear around the stop and search process, it has to be based on intelligence reasons for its use. That helps.
Absolutely, I'll pass that on to the resident, and I'll pass it on whenever such a matter comes up again. Much obliged.
Okay.
Thanks very much for that, George. Right, I can't see any more faces, so thank you very much for your time, Dave, as Police and Crime Commissioner for Dorset. Thank you also to your team for the hard work that goes on in the background in order to provide you with the necessary detailed elements, seeing as that you handle the strategic level stuff, the up and out stuff. And also thanks also to the panel for their patience and good questions to this particular meeting. And also thanks to Dorset Council players for all the hosting work they do in support of this meeting. I think it's for me to wish you all happy Christmas, happy New Year. Hopefully things will get better. And also remind everyone that we will have the informal meeting on the 13th of January to discuss finance issues. So on that high note, I'm going to close this meeting if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Great meeting.